Thanks, John. I really appreciate it. So, my name is Mark Simos. I am by day feel like I'm doing a Batman introduction here. By day, I'm a Microsoft cybersecurity architect, lead cybersecurity architect, and I'm also security forum chair. So I'll go through a little bit more detailed intro in just a moment. So the thing that we've observed is that the security industry started out as sort of an accidental industry of people that were willing to do security or were assigned to do security, whether they liked it or not. Their bosses assigned them to do it, and that's pretty much what anyone that has gray hair generally is an accidental security person, because there wasn't a formal degree or anything at the time that we started. Where we are now is kind of a cybersecurity, a gold rush boom and bust, where there's a whole lot of good information, a whole lot of excitement. There is also some bad information and scams and whatnot mixed in. And where we are trying to drive the industry to collectively with this work at the Open Group is to a well-defined profession. And so we are on the road there. There's a lot of the raw material, but it hasn't necessarily been assembled, organized, or rationalized. And so that is really a huge part of the mission of what we're doing with this Security Zero Trust body of knowledge. So today we're going to be covering that body of knowledge. Again, I have those three different roles. Incidentally, Nikhil and I also are working on a book together because, quite frankly, we couldn't. Yeah, we were so bored with all the other work, that we needed more. A series of books. Yes, thank you. And so the thing that we found as sort of a rule of thumb is if I need it at my Microsoft work to be able to provide effective guidance, if we need it for the Zero Trust Playbook series to provide effective role-by-role guidance for all the roles, it's pretty much my rule of thumb for what I usually submit or contribute from each of those bodies of knowledge, separate bodies of knowledge, into the actual Open Group body of knowledge, just as a sort of proxy for me. But ultimately, that's the three different lenses that I look at the world through. So the first part here we're going to cover is that body of knowledge, so I'll jump right in there. Ultimately, the thing that we found, at the end of the day, is that security is just a support function of business. We'll cover that a lot more in a little bit later. But ultimately, what matters to a business or to an organization is money, revenue, profit, and cost, especially for a for-profit company. Mission, there is something beyond the money. Outside of financial services, of course. But there's something beyond the mission in terms of saving lives or helping people. There's a purpose. There's a reason that the organization exists in the first place. And then there's things that are commonly needed to enable that mission and to enable that money to come in, et cetera, and to be efficient. And so we found that and there's a gain and loss on either side of these. And this is what a business leader, an organizational leader deals with. And the challenges that we've seen is around risk specifically, because a risk is a potential loss, but specifically around security risk. And that's where really what we're trying to rationalize is that aspect of risk to an organization. So the questions that we set out to answer with the security and zero trust body of knowledge is some of the basics around security. Why do we bother with security and zero trust? What are the requirements that I have to meet? What does good look like, essentially? And then there's a lot of questions around zero trust itself. What is it? There's a lot of answers out there. Some of them are good. A lot of them are not. And how do I plan and implement zero trust? How do I actually make that real? And a huge part of that, of course, is bringing the whole organization along. And so that leads to all sorts of interesting questions around who does what, which led to the roles and glossary we'll talk about in a moment. But how do I guide all the architecture and teams? How do I measure progress and maturity as we go? And then a big part of this is risk, as I mentioned. So how do I then integrate security risk into enterprise risk management at the company? Whether there is risk management already, whether it's mature, or whether they don't even have it. And it's just sort of a gut instinct of organizational leaders, as in the case of many small organizations. And then, of course, how do I quantify that, which is where the open fair standards are really good at taking that risk and turning it into a range of potential impact and a likelihood of that happening. So all of these essentially resulted in a number of different standards. And so some of these are in progress, some of these are released, some of these are planned, and we know that there's a problem space to address. Starting from the left, security matrix. It's all about, quite frankly, a red to blue mapping. We are standardizing the attackers. We're not standardizing them for the purposes of making them conform to these and for all their attacks, obviously. We are standardizing them for the purpose that we have a common language to talk about. And then, very importantly, that red to blue mapping is, as a defender, what do we need to do? What are the requirements that come about because the attackers buy and sell and trade the information and tools online, that they sell access to kits, to ransomware as a service kit. What does that mean to me and my strategy? What requirements does it create? And so that's really what the security matrix is about. And it's another role that it has is bringing together a lot of different standards, OWASP, MITRE ATT&CK, NIST cybersecurity framework into one coherent whole and relate them to each other so you know how each of them actually should be applied in different ways. So that's a huge part of that one. On the right-hand side, jumping over here, is sort of the green to blue mapping. So enterprise risk integration, how does an organization actually function? And how do they manage, and how do they operate, and how do they manage risk specifically? And then what does that mean, again, with that other set of requirements, that mirror set of requirements, so that we can be an effective part of the organization, integrate with how it operates and manages risk. Open Fair is sort of a subset of that, with a very important, how do I turn all this risk into dollar ranges and likelihoods? Then we have to define what good looks like. So Zero Trust Commandment does that in unequivocal, firm terms. Must and shall statement. This is good security. This is not good security. Zero Trust being a stand-in for good security. And then, of course, I have a whole lot of teams to coordinate this with throughout the organization. So I need to be able to put it into a set of security principles that I can apply to all of my architectures, my enterprise architecture, my identity, my security, my network architecture, all of them, to make sure that they're all following the same set of rules. So those are done, those are released. Security Matrix is in progress. We're working towards a release on that one. Security roles and glossary. This is the one that we're formally announcing today, that the first release of it, the draft snapshot, will be coming out, or is coming out. Sorry, I'm so used to the future tense. And this defines, it's pretty much, as the British people like to say, the name is on the tin. We are defining a glossary. The reason for that is there's a lot of terminology that is conflicting, confusing, used differently in different parts of the organization, means different things, poorly defined by various different other folks. So we're really trying to clean up the language of security. And then the roles. So we found that security is not just the security team's job. We'll talk about that more explicitly in a bit. But ultimately, security is something that has to be done throughout the whole organization. We've documented about 73 roles so far. And that number may go a little up or a little bit down. But how do you actually define then the jobs of those people, and what do they do to support security? And so that's really what the security roles and glossary is about. We have a dedicated session after the break to cover that. Next is you have to then define, okay, what is this thing? What is the operating model for it? What does it actually look like? And so just like a business requires business capabilities to be defined, so I buy raw material, I make a product, I sell a product, I ship a product. That doesn't change even if you're shipping it with a plane, a train, or an automobile. So you need these well-defined capabilities that are durable, that don't change. And then you need people, process, technology underneath that on how to execute it. People come from the roles, obviously. We're cross-mapping those. Process and technology are architecture building blocks, or ABBs, as we like to call them. And so that's really where the reference model comes in. And so that's one half of it. The other half of it is how do you actually collaborate and integrate all these different components together? And so it's kind of a two-part thing there. Implementation guide, obviously it's not going to be an 8-book series like Nikhil and I are crazy enough to write, but generally, guidelines, overview, how are we actually approaching this? How do we then apply all of that reference model, make it real with those roles, et cetera? And then, of course, how do you measure progress and maturity? I need maturity models. I need to prioritize this. It's a lot of work. And so that's more of a gap that we know we need to fill. And so we don't know if we're going to use the existing OISM standard, or we're going to reboot that, or we're going to create something new. We're still kind of figuring out what the right path is on that one. But that is the security and zero trust body of knowledge. So I'll pause there for a moment. We have a little bit more deep dive into each of the different standards. But see if anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts to add. Does that seem complete? Seem like a lot?
Lessons learned that you get in your day-to-day work and ask questions, because that's kind of what Mark and I are looking for. We're looking for feedback, input, communications, because we want to create a holistic program, which is obviously going to change the world. But apart from that, that's what we're trying to do.
100%. Yeah, this is meant to catalyze changes because, quite frankly, our security industry, as I mentioned earlier, is broken, and it's helping contribute to a broken corporate world and, to a degree, society. And so our job is to really kind of catalyze that change. So we'll go through these in a bit more detail. Ultimately, the body of knowledge itself writ large is focused on a couple different things. One is to modernize, second is to rationalize, third is to organize. Second and third are kind of related to each other. First off, we want to make sure we're changing some broken assumptions. We'll talk about these in more depth after the break in the roles and glossary section. But ultimately, instead of security as a security team's job, I pay you for that. I don't want to deal with risk. I don't want to think about that. It's actually, security is actually part of everyone's job. And so in order to fix that assumption, we have to explain that to everyone and how this actually impacts them. So that assumption is one of the things that we're changing throughout all those different things I mentioned earlier. Assets have to be protected wherever they are, not just behind the firewall. This one's sort of the well understood part of Zero Trust. But those two in total tend to be a very good description of the kinds of changes that Zero Trust brings across the world. Second one is we want to rationalize. We don't want to waste all the good work that's been done for NIST Cybersecurity Framework, for MITRE ATT&CK, for OWASP, for all these different organizations and standards that are out there. We want to make sure we're connecting the ones that are useful, that are good, that are effective, and that people have chosen to use because they're effective and they help them with their job. Let's go ahead and connect all those together. Again, mostly through the security matrix, but also through other sources as well. And then organize. A big part of this is not that we're putting out 8 or 10 independent standards, it's that we're doing the work to integrate and connect them. I mentioned earlier the capabilities in the Zero Trust reference model are going to be mapped to the roles in the security roles and glossary, cross-linking them. One of the things that we need to do when you make this everyone's job, say I'm just an infrastructure person, I work on cloud infrastructure and I work on on-prem infrastructure, right? Containers and servers and the like, right? I need to learn a little bit about the MITRE ATT&CK. I don't need to learn the whole thing. It's huge, right? But I need to know the attacks that are relevant to my assets. I cannot do that in the way that the standards are set up today, because what assets do I own and deal with? What are the threats to those assets? I have to be able to map and link those to me as my role, and in which case you have to standardize 3 or 4 of different nouns in that sentence. And so that's part of the objective of this, is to make sure that the dots are connected so you can bring all those things together and be able to say, here's an educational package for these roles, and that way they know exactly what to learn, what to do, and they can do that without having to constantly go back and forth security team. So that's one of the big goals of this. So, Zero Trust Commandments. Zero Trust Commandments, like I said, must and shall statements, very, very clear, high-level statements, but very, very clear statements on what good looks like, what it does not look like. If you are following these and what you're doing in the proposal you're making, the investment you're making follows the Zero Trust Commandments, then it's Zero Trust, then it's good security. If you are violating that, then it's a bad idea, and it's not going to work. It's meant to set very high-level rules that are very, very clear on it to make sure that there is no question about what Zero Trust is, what it isn't, and then I was influenced by some random marketing thing from some cybersecurity vendor that's desperate for a sale. The idea is to bring some clarity to this and focus those folks on the right things, because there's a lot of energy there. We want to direct it. And so that's the idea there. Security principles for architecture, we use the TOGAF format purposely because we wanted to take that well-established format and then apply what that good looks like in terms of a set of principles. The intent for this very explicitly is copy and paste these into your security architecture, copy and paste them into your enterprise architecture, identity architecture, network architecture, your infrastructure architecture, your solution architecture for your big complex payment system, whatever it happens to be. These are the principles we will follow. And then, of course, number 2, follow them. Because we all know that just because they're in there doesn't mean people actually follow them. And then, of course, consult your security team with questions. That's really the use case that we're trying to drive here. Zero Trust reference model, as I mentioned, there's 2 halves, the capabilities and the architecture building blocks. This tells you what security is in no uncertain terms, and then the people, process, tech, the architecture building blocks to enable those. And then the collaboration integration model. How does the security team work with the technology team, work with the business teams? How do you do all those kind of things? So high-level definitions to make sure that those interactions are well understood, and that, you're going through a merger and acquisition. That should trigger a security process, right? The CEO sees a thing about a cyber attack in the news. That should trigger a security process. The technology team bought a new technology. That should trigger a process. The development team is going to use agile methodology or infrastructure as code or whatever it is. That should trigger a security process. And so we're defining each of those touch points so that people know when they should be engaging security and bringing that into it. And so helping plan and execute that security modernization for the people, process, tech, and then guide your ongoing operations and improvement. Security roles and glossary. We'll be talking about this in much more detail. This is a quick high level of the use cases. So organizational planning on what kind of roles do I need to build? What do I need to educate those roles on, both in the security team, outside the security team? Building the job roles and job descriptions so that we're actually going to bring in people with the right skill sets and, of course, interview and hire those candidates, evaluate their performance, make sure that you're giving them career paths so they know where they can go next, what other skills they're going to build, and then planning and managing outsourcing. Because at the end of the day, when you hire an outsourcer, you are basically bringing in someone else who has expertise that is not an employee to replace the need for an internal team to do so. And so you need to have those same outcomes met regardless of whether it's a full-time employee, a contractor, or a contract with somebody else providing a service. And so it's intended to bring clarity to all of those situations. Security Matrix, as I mentioned, is going to be primarily focused on an initial release as a white paper to make the case for the matrix so we can get some of the material that we put out there. It's going to be a fairly large and significant standard based on what we're seeing right now. But again, we're going to define the attackers at the strategy level, at their motivation level. Are they a criminal, a nation state, et cetera? What does that mean to me? What are the resources they have at their disposal? What are the markets they can participate in? Here's the actuals of how an attacker operates or attackers operate. And then what do those mean to me? What does that make me have to do to change my strategy? What requirements do I now have to meet? And so that's really the focus of that. And then, clear up a lot of the taxonomy. MITRE has done a great job for specific tactics, techniques, and procedures attackers use, but they don't go at a higher level of abstraction. They don't cover process and people abuse. It's only proven technical, MITRE ATT&CK specifically, only covers proven technical, seen in the wild attacks. And so we want to make sure that we're actually covering the full scope and being able to map those in and then up. And then, that'll then get us the requirements we have to meet to be effective at dealing with the threats we have. And of course, one of the main things that's already in there that's going to be part of the first release is prioritization. Like, that is the number one thing. We're not expecting people to solve all these problems, but you can't solve a problem by just taking a shortcut of what worked yesterday. You have to understand the full problem, because otherwise your top 10 list is going to be the first 10 things we could think of, as opposed to the 10 things that are actually the most important, the most impactful. And so that's really the process of this. Make sense? Open, fair body of knowledge. Probably don't have to educate too many folks here on it, but this is ultimately taking the vagueness of cybersecurity risk and turning it into a range of dollar impact, or euro, or yen, or whatever the currency you measure in. And then what is the likelihood of that, with all sorts of different interesting things about tail risk and trading off between the confidence of your estimation versus the range and the width of it. Excellent. I'm still learning about it, to be honest with you. I am not the most, the deepest expert in the world on open fair, but I am learning more and more as we go. Zero Trust Implementation Guide. On this one, we are definitely going to take sort of that three-pillar model of strategy, operational, operating model. Kind of a plan, build, run, not exactly, but kind of a plan, build, run. And how do you approach this? How do you get started on a journey? How do you continuously improve? The intent is to give some good high-level guidance to get people going, give them a couple of quick wins and quick starts on certain things that are high impact. So that's really what we're looking for that implementation guide. How are we doing on time here? Okay, I got about 5 minutes. Yep. And then Enterprise Risk Integration. This is a new project. So this one just got chartered up about 2-3 months ago, I think, for the final approval. And so ultimately, this is really the mirror of the security matrix, because ultimately, at the end of the day, security is about keeping the assets that the organization cares about away from the attackers, the bad guys, the threat actors. And so you have to understand the threat actors, and you have to understand the assets. And so this is really about understanding how those assets work, how they're operated, how they're run, how the risk to them is already managed for other things like hurricanes, natural disasters, you name it. And so what this is really setting out to do is to provide that mirror to the security matrix, and identify again how does this actually work, and then what is the implication, and how do I manage that risk effectively. So we expect the structure of this may evolve as we go and as we learn, as we find out more. But right now it is, we've got, I think, a good outline set up, and we're working through it. So this one is proceeding really nicely. We've actually got a number of contributors, about 6, 7 active folks, if not more actually by this point. So very excited about this one, and we're expecting very good things from this one. The one way I think about this from a quick layman's way of explaining it is this is the scars that your experienced senior CISOs have learned as they interacted with businesses over the years, over multiple different jobs, and all the bumps and bruises that they've gotten. Here's how to avoid them for the next generation. So that's kind of the way that I think about this in the shorthand. And then this one is the one we've done the least amount of work on. There is an OISM standard that's, the content itself I think was refreshed sometime in the past 5-10 years if I recall correctly, but the original content somewhere in the 15-ish year range. So it is quite an older standard. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but we're just taking a look at it from the content of it, from the format of it. Is this something that we want to use to guide people on the maturity model and their prioritization journey? Or is it something that, you know what, this is really not taking us in the right direction, we want to start from scratch, and do we keep the same name, and do we retire that, do we continue on with it? So we're kind of going through the early thinking of that. We know that there's a need for maturity models of measuring where you are, so you can plan your next progress, your next investment. We know there's a need for prioritization guidance. Does it land in the implementation guide? Does it land in this? There's a bunch of open questions we're working on, but we know we absolutely have to address this. And so that is on the placeholder there to make sure we address that one. And so I think that is the end of the prepared content I have for the first part. So any questions before we move on to the next session in 2 minutes?
Hi. So, this is something we've, Mark socialized with you the vision of how we're creating a complete capability and zero trust body of knowledge that the entire industry can adopt. Pretty much irrespective of whether you're an agency, a governmental agency, an academic institution, or an industrial institution. We would love engagement, feedback as we go, as we build the standard up. Mark, you want to add?
Yes, absolutely. And for folks that don't, please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me on LinkedIn. That's one of the ways we're informally taking feedback and input and ideas. Obviously, it's fairly limited. If you do want to actively participate, we'd love you to join the open group and truly join in and be part of the writing and reviewing and discussion process. But that doesn't mean we're restricting it to only that. And so feel free to reach out directly on LinkedIn. And as best I can respond to the direct messages, I will, or comments and whatnot that you have. So that's a best effort, we'll call it a feedback channel. But we are very, very open to this. We really want to see this succeed. We want to see this catalyze change in the industry, the way people think about security, the way they think about accountabilities, the way they think about building it. The intent is to really, quite frankly, dare to imagine a better world as opposed to being stuck in the one that we have and trying to influence it slowly. The intent is to really put a clear vision out there that makes sense, that follows other organizational disciplines like finance, like legal, and how those are integrated into an organization. Because security is as you'll see in the security Roles and Glossary Standard presentation, security is fundamentally broken in the way that we interact with the organization in most organizations. Not all, some of them are highly functional, but those are rare exceptions. Those are rare jewels among the mud of what we see out there for just general maturity level. So we'll be all around all day, and you'll see me later. You get tired of hearing me, I'm sure, by then. Thank you.